Just before dawn on May 11, 1945, Private John McKinney lay sleeping inside a tent near Dingalan Bay on the eastern coast of Luzon, Philippine Islands. He had just finished a long shift manning a light machine gun on the outpost's perimeter. He was 24 years old. A sharecropper's son from Screven County, Georgia, with a third-grade education and a lifetime spent hunting in the swamps to feed his family. At that moment, nearly 100 Japanese infantrymen were crawling through the jungle toward his position. McKinney belonged to Company A, 123rd Infantry Regiment, 33rd Infantry Division. The division had landed at Lingayen Gulf in February 1945 and spent 3 brutal months fighting through the Caraballo Mountains toward Baguio, the summer capital of the Philippines and headquarters of General Yamashita. The campaign on Luzon was the largest American ground operation in the entire Pacific War. 10 U.S. divisions and 5 independent regiments were committed to the island. By the time McKinney's unit reached the eastern coast, the 6th Army had suffered more than 8,000 killed or missing and nearly 30,000 wounded. After Baguio fell on April 26th, elements of the 33rd Division pushed east across the Sierra Madre Range toward the Pacific coast. Company A established a small outpost near the village of Umire on Dingalan Bay. The terrain was suffocating. Triple canopy jungle pressed against the perimeter on 3 sides. The bay sat behind them. Resupply came by sea, when it came at all. The nearest reinforcements were miles away through trackless mountain jungle. The entire perimeter defense depended on foxholes, a few light machine guns, and the alertness of men who had been fighting without real rest for months. The Japanese forces on Luzon were far from defeated. General Yamashita still commanded an estimated 170,000 troops scattered through the island's mountains and jungles. Cut off from resupply since the American landings in January, starving, ravaged by malaria, dysentery, and beriberi, these soldiers had standing orders to fight until death. They launched night raids against isolated American positions, probing perimeters in the darkness, targeting machine gun emplacements first. If a Japanese assault team could seize an American machine gun and turn it inward, they could shred a company from inside its own defensive line. The tactic had worked before on Luzon. American units had learned to fear the hours just before dawn. McKinney understood this threat. He had been in the Pacific since 1943. Hawaii first, then New Guinea, then Morotai in the Dutch East Indies, and now Luzon. He had survived the savage mountain fighting on the drive to Baguio. But he carried one advantage that no amount of army training could match. John McKinney had grown up barefoot in the swamps of southern Georgia, hunting with a borrowed rifle to put food on his family's table. Squirrels, rabbits, anything that moved. The general store owner in Sylvania had lent the boy a rifle in exchange for surplus game. McKinney learned to shoot fast, reload in darkness, and stay calm when something dangerous was close. By the time the Army drafted him in November 1942 at age 23, he was already one of the finest natural marksmen in Screven County. He slept with his M1 Garand beside him every night, old habit from Georgia. That habit was about to save his entire company. If this story has you watching, hit that like button so more people can find these forgotten heroes. Subscribe and you will never miss one. Now back to Dingalan Bay, May 1945. 3 Americans manned the machine gun nearest McKinney's tent. The rest of Company A slept behind the perimeter. No one had detected the Japanese assault force assembling in the tree line. Then a Japanese sergeant named Fukutaro Mori slipped through the wire undetected. He found McKinney's tent. He lifted the flap. He raised his sword and brought it down on McKinney's head. The blade missed his skull by inches, but sliced off part of his right ear. Blood poured down the side of his face. McKinney's eyes snapped open to darkness, searing pain, and the shape of a man raising a sword to strike again. McKinney did not hesitate. His M1 Garand lay right beside him. He seized it by the barrel and swung the wooden stock into Sergeant Mori's jaw. The impact knocked the Japanese NCO sideways. McKinney swung again, this time at the man's skull. Mori dropped. Behind him, a second Japanese soldier lunged through the tent flap with a fixed bayonet. McKinney flipped the rifle, fired from the hip, and killed him at a range of less than 4 feet. The crack of the shot split the pre-dawn silence across the entire perimeter. Everything happened in seconds. McKinney rolled out of the tent, blood streaming from his severed ear, and moved toward the machine gun position a few paces away. 3 Americans had been manning that gun. What McKinney found changed the next 36 minutes of his life. One of the 3 had been stabbed. He was bleeding badly. The second man had grabbed the wounded soldier and was dragging him toward the interior of the perimeter to find a medic. The third position was empty. The light machine gun that anchored this section of Company A's defense sat unmanned, and the Japanese were already closing on it. McKinney was alone. No order came from a commanding officer. No squad formed up beside him. The rest of Company A was still waking up, scrambling in the darkness, trying to understand what was happening. The Japanese assault force knew exactly what was happening. Their scouts had identified the machine gun positions. Their plan was simple and proven. Seize the guns, turn them inward, kill the Americans with their own weapons while the camp was still confused in the dark. 10 Japanese infantrymen reached the machine gun emplacement ahead of McKinney. They had already surrounded it. They were working to reverse the weapon, to swing the barrel toward the interior of the American perimeter, where dozens of men were still in their tents. If those 10 soldiers succeeded in turning that gun, the burst of fire into the crowded camp would have been catastrophic. At close range, a light machine gun could cut through canvas tents and the men sleeping inside them in seconds. Company A would be hit from inside its own defensive line, with no cover and no warning. McKinney did not wait for them to finish. He charged straight into the emplacement, the range close to 0. He fired his Garand into the cluster of Japanese soldiers at point-blank distance. The M1 held 8 rounds in its en-bloc clip. McKinney fired with the speed and precision of a man who had learned to shoot squirrels out of cypress trees as a child. 7 Japanese fell before the clip ejected with its distinctive metallic ping. 3 remained. There was no time to reload. McKinney reversed his rifle again and used the stock as a club. He struck the first man across the face. The second went down with a blow to the throat. The third fell after McKinney drove the butt plate into his chest. In a matter of seconds, all 10 Japanese soldiers around the machine gun were dead. But the fight for the gun had cost McKinney his best weapon. In the hand-to-hand struggle, the light machine gun had been knocked from its mount. Parts of the firing mechanism were damaged. The weapon was inoperative. McKinney checked it, realized it would not fire, and abandoned it. He now stood in a wrecked gun emplacement, surrounded by 10 dead enemy soldiers, holding only his M1 Garand, with blood running down his neck from his mangled ear. And from the jungle tree line, the main Japanese assault force was charging the perimeter. Not 10 men this time. Dozens. They came in waves, hurling grenades, firing rifles, and launching knee mortar shells that arced through the canopy and exploded among the tents. McKinney grabbed ammunition. He changed position, and he began to fire. The M1 Garand rifle held 8 rounds. Each en-bloc clip weighed about half a pound. A trained infantryman could reload in under 3 seconds. McKinney was faster than trained. He had been shooting since he was old enough to hold a rifle barrel steady against a cypress trunk in the Georgia swamps. Speed and accuracy were not skills he had learned in the army. They were survival instincts burned into his muscles through a decade of hunting to keep his family from going hungry. He needed every fraction of that speed now. The main Japanese assault force came out of the jungle in a wave, not single file, not probing. A full infantry charge aimed directly at the machine gun position McKinney had just taken back. The Japanese commander had sent the first 10 men to seize the gun and turn it on the Americans. That team was dead. Now the rest were coming to finish the job with sheer numbers. McKinney could not stay in the wrecked emplacement. The position was known. Japanese mortarmen had already zeroed in on it. Knee mortar shells began dropping around the gun pit, blasting dirt and shrapnel through the air. A knee mortar, the Type 89 grenade discharger, weighed just over 10 pounds and could be operated by a single soldier bracing it against his thigh. It launched a grenade accurately out to around 700 yards. The Japanese deployed them in pairs. McKinney could hear the distinctive hollow thump of the launchers firing from somewhere beyond the tree line, followed by the whistle and detonation of the 50mm shells. He moved, not backward toward the safety of the interior perimeter where Company A was scrambling to organize a defense. He moved laterally, staying on the perimeter line, keeping himself between the Japanese assault force and his sleeping comrades. He found ammunition, bandoliers, loose clips. He grabbed everything he could carry. Then he picked a new position and opened fire. The Garand kicked against his shoulder. 8 rounds. The clip ejected. He slammed another one home. 8 more rounds. The Japanese kept coming. McKinney kept firing. When the jungle was too dark to see clearly, he fired at muzzle flashes. When shapes emerged from the undergrowth at close range, he fired from the hip the way he had fired at the second man in his tent. When a group rushed him together, he aimed for the center mass of the nearest man, worked the trigger as fast as the semi-automatic action would cycle, and dropped them before they could close the distance. The Japanese did not stop. They charged in waves with fixed bayonets. Some threw grenades before rushing forward. The explosions tore through the vegetation and sent fragments whipping past McKinney's position. He kept moving after each burst of fire. Shoot, reload, move, find cover, shoot again. It was the rhythm of a man who understood that standing still meant dying. A squirrel hunter from Georgia knew that instinctively. Stay in one spot after firing a shot, and every predator in the swamp knows where you are. Minutes passed. McKinney burned through clip after clip. His Garand grew hot. At some point, the barrel temperature made the weapon dangerous to fire accurately. McKinney picked up another M1 from the ground near the position of his wounded comrades. He kept shooting. When that rifle's clip ran dry and he could not reload fast enough, he grabbed a third. The jungle floor around the perimeter was not short of American rifles. The question was whether there would be enough ammunition before the Japanese ran out of men willing to charge. The attack had been underway for more than 15 minutes. McKinney had not taken a single step backward. Somewhere behind him, Company A was beginning to form a coherent defense, but no one had reached McKinney's section of the line. He was still alone, and the Japanese were regrouping in the tree line for another push. The second major wave hit McKinney's position sometime around 0430. The sky had begun to shift from black toward the faint gray that precedes tropical dawn in the Philippines. Just enough light to see shapes, not enough to see faces. The Japanese came from 2 directions this time. A group from the left flank pushed through the undergrowth toward the wrecked machine gun emplacement. A second group tried to loop around McKinney's right side, working through the dense vegetation to get behind him and cut him off from the rest of Company A. McKinney read the movement the way a hunter reads the tree line. He did not panic. He did not freeze. He shifted position again, angling himself so he could cover both approaches without exposing his back. Then he waited until the nearest group was close enough for the Garand to be decisive. He opened fire. The first 2 soldiers dropped. The third stumbled over the body of the second, and McKinney shot him before he could recover. The rest scattered into the undergrowth. But the flanking group on the right made it closer. They closed to within bayonet range before McKinney could swing the rifle around. There was no distance left for marksmanship. The fight became physical again. McKinney used his Garand the way he had used it in the machine gun pit. Stock first, swinging at heads and throats and chests. A 9.5-pound rifle with a solid walnut stock hits like a sledgehammer when a man puts his full weight behind it. McKinney put everything he had behind every swing. Soldiers went down. He did not count them. He simply kept swinging until no one was standing close enough to reach him with a blade. Then he reloaded and started shooting again. The pattern repeated. A wave would charge. McKinney would fire until the clip ejected. If the enemy was too close, he would reverse the rifle and fight hand to hand. When the wave broke and the survivors pulled back into the jungle, McKinney would grab ammunition, shift to a new position, and wait for the next one. He was bleeding steadily from the ear wound. His hands were slick with blood and sweat. His shoulder ached from the constant recoil. None of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was that Company A's perimeter had not been breached. Behind him, the rest of the company was awake and fighting. Other positions along the perimeter were engaged with Japanese probes, but the main weight of the assault, the heaviest concentration of enemy troops, remained focused on the sector McKinney was defending alone. The Japanese commander had committed his force to breaking through at the machine gun position. It was the most logical point of entry. Take the gun, turn it inward, collapse the perimeter from within. The plan had not changed. What had changed was that a single private from Georgia had turned that position into a killing ground. By now, the area around the machine gun emplacement was littered with Japanese dead. Bodies lay in overlapping rows. Some had fallen within arm's reach of the gun mount. Some lay in the trampled vegetation 5 and 10 yards out. The nearest one still clutched bayonets and grenades. The ground was torn up by mortar blasts, boot prints, and the drag marks where wounded Japanese had crawled back toward the tree line. The air smelled of cordite, blood, and the sharp tropical rot of the Philippine jungle floor. McKinney picked up another rifle. He checked the clip. He found a position with a clear line of fire toward the tree line where the Japanese were massing again. The assault was now past the 20-minute mark. The enemy still had enough men to overrun him, and they were preparing to try one final time. The Japanese assault force had expected to overrun a sleeping outpost in minutes, seize the machine guns, turn them inward, shatter the perimeter before the Americans could organize. It was a proven tactic. It had worked against isolated American positions elsewhere on Luzon, where starving but disciplined Japanese infantry had broken through defensive lines under cover of darkness. Against a small outpost like Umire, with a handful of light machine guns and a company of exhausted soldiers, the math should have been simple. 100 men against a perimeter held by a few dozen. The attack should have been over before the sun came up. It was not over, and the Japanese commander now faced a problem he had not anticipated. The primary assault axis, the machine gun emplacement on the perimeter, had become impassable. Every wave he sent toward that position came back shattered or did not come back at all. The gun itself was destroyed. There was no weapon there to capture anymore. But the single American defending that sector was killing his men faster than he could push them forward. The Japanese had no way of knowing it was one man. In the darkness and confusion, the volume and accuracy of fire coming from that section of the perimeter suggested a reinforced squad at minimum. The response was predictable. The Japanese shifted their mortar fire. The knee mortar teams repositioned and concentrated their shells on the area around McKinney's section. The 50mm grenades came in clusters now, 2 launchers working together, dropping rounds every few seconds, trying to saturate the ground where the American fire was coming from. The blasts shredded vegetation, threw dirt into the air, and sent fragments slicing horizontally through the undergrowth at waist height. Any man standing upright in that zone would have been cut apart. McKinney was not standing upright. He was low, moving between shots, using the same instinct that had kept him alive in the machine gun pit. But the mortar fire was a serious threat. The explosions were close enough to feel the pressure waves against his chest. Dirt and debris rained down on him between bursts. The knee mortar teams were operating from a position roughly 45 yards beyond the perimeter, screened by jungle. McKinney could hear the launchers, but could not yet see the crews in the pre-dawn gray. Dawn was breaking over Dingalan Bay. The sky shifted from gray to pale orange along the eastern horizon. The jungle canopy filtered the early light into scattered patches on the ground. For the first time since Maury had slashed open his tent, McKinney could begin to see clearly, and what he saw confirmed what he already knew. The tree line was full of Japanese soldiers, dozens of them, preparing for what would be the final coordinated push. If this wave broke through, there would be nothing between the assault force and the sleeping interior of Company A's camp. The mortar fire increased. Grenades sailed through the air from the tree line, thrown by hand, arcing over the undergrowth and detonating around McKinney's position. The Japanese were trying to suppress him long enough for the infantry to close the distance. It was a sound tactic. Fix the defender with explosives, rush him while he is keeping his head down, finish him with bayonets before he can resume firing. McKinney had been fighting for nearly 30 minutes. He was wounded, exhausted, and alone. His ammunition was running low. The mortar position at 45 yards was the key. Those 2 launchers were the only thing giving the Japanese infantry enough cover to regroup and charge. If the mortars kept firing, the next wave might reach him before he could reload. The Japanese knew this. McKinney knew it too. He could see the mortar flashes now. 2 positions, 45 yards out, right at the edge of the tree line. 2 men per launcher. He raised his Garand. McKinney aimed at the nearest mortar flash. 45 yards. In the Georgia swamps, he had dropped squirrels out of trees at greater distances with a borrowed single-shot rifle as a boy. The M1 Garand was a far superior weapon. Semi-automatic, 8 rounds, accurate well beyond 200 yards in the hands of a competent marksman. At 45 yards, for a shooter of McKinney's caliber, it was close to point blank. He fired twice. The first mortar crew went silent. He shifted aim to the second flash and fired again. The second launcher stopped. 4 Japanese soldiers at 2 mortar positions ceased to exist in the time it took McKinney to pull the trigger 4 times. The knee mortars that had been hammering his section of the perimeter for the last several minutes went dead. The constant crump of detonations stopped. For a brief moment, the only sounds were rifle fire from other sections of the perimeter and the screams of wounded men in the jungle. The silence from the mortar positions changed the entire fight. The Japanese infantry in the tree line had been waiting for the mortar barrage to pin McKinney down long enough for them to cross the open ground and overwhelm him. Without that suppressive fire, the charge would be naked. No cover, no explosions to keep the Americans' head down, just open ground between the tree line and a man who had not missed a shot that mattered in the last half hour. They charged anyway. Japanese infantry doctrine in 1945, particularly among the remnant forces on Luzon, left no room for retreat. Surrender was not an option. Withdrawal was a temporary measure at best. The standing order from General Yamashita's headquarters was to fight to the last man and inflict maximum casualties on the Americans before dying. The soldiers emerging from the tree line at Umare that morning were following that order to the letter. McKinney met them the same way he had met every wave before. Garand up. Trigger working as fast as the action would cycle. When one rifle ran dry, he grabbed another from the ground. The bodies around his position provided grim resupply. Japanese rifles, American rifles, loose clips scattered in the dirt. McKinney used whatever was loaded and within reach. The charging soldiers fell in 1s and 2s and 3s. Some made it close enough to throw grenades. The explosions bracketed McKinney's position, showering him with dirt and steel fragments. He kept firing. The last wave broke. Not because the Japanese lost their nerve. They did not break and run. They simply ran out of men willing to cross the ground McKinney was covering. The survivors pulled back into the jungle and did not regroup for another charge. The sustained, accurate rifle fire from one man in a wrecked gun emplacement had done what the entire perimeter defense was designed to do. It had held the line. 36 minutes after Sergeant Fukutaro Mori had slashed open McKinney's tent with a sword, the battle for the Umire outpost was over. McKinney stood on the perimeter. Blood had dried in a dark crust down the right side of his neck from his severed ear. His hands were raw from the recoil of 3 different rifles and the impact of using them as clubs. Shell casings littered the ground around his feet. The first full light of morning was breaking through the jungle canopy over Dingalan Bay, and somewhere behind him, the men of Company A were finally reaching his position. They were about to see something that none of them would ever forget. When the first soldiers from Company A reached McKinney's section of the perimeter, the sun was above the tree line. Full daylight revealed the scale of what had happened. 38 Japanese dead lay in and around the machine gun emplacement. Bodies were piled on top of each other near the gun mount. Some had fallen so close to McKinney's firing positions that their outstretched hands nearly touched the American foxhole. Beyond the perimeter, another 2 Japanese soldiers lay dead beside their knee mortar, 45 yards from the gun pit. The total was 40 confirmed kills. 1 man, 36 minutes. The rest of the Japanese assault force had withdrawn into the jungle. Estimates varied, but the attacking unit had numbered approximately 100. McKinney had killed or incapacitated close to half of them by himself. The survivors had abandoned their dead and pulled back through the Sierra Madre toward the interior of Luzon, where the remnants of Yamashita's forces were slowly starving in the mountains. They did not attack the Umare outpost again. Company A's officers began documenting the action immediately. In the United States Army, a Medal of Honor recommendation required eyewitness testimony, a detailed after-action report, and review at multiple levels of command before reaching the War Department in Washington. The process was deliberately rigorous. The medal had been established during the Civil War and remained the highest military decoration the United States could award. Fewer than 3,500 had been issued in the nation's entire history, across every conflict from the 1860s forward. False or exaggerated claims were grounds for court-martial. Every detail had to be verified. The witnesses were there. The wounded machine gunner who had been dragged to safety saw McKinney charge the emplacement and kill 10 men at point-blank range. Other members of Company A who reached the perimeter during the fighting observed McKinney firing alone, changing positions under mortar fire, and engaging the Japanese in hand-to-hand combat. The physical evidence was overwhelming. 40 dead enemy soldiers in a concentrated area around a single defensive position. Shell casings from multiple M1 Garands. The destroyed machine gun. The 2 dead mortar crews at measured distance of 45 yards. The after-action report went up the chain from company to battalion to regiment to division headquarters of the 33rd Infantry Division. McKinney's wound was treated in the field. The severed portion of his ear could not be reattached. He was bandaged, given sulfa powder to prevent infection, and returned to duty. He did not request evacuation. He did not ask for leave. He went back to his position on the perimeter and continued to serve with Company A as if the morning of May 11th had been an ordinary day. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor moved through the Army's review process over the following months. The war in the Pacific ended in August 1945 when Japan surrendered. The 33rd Infantry Division moved to occupation duty in Japan. McKinney was promoted from private to sergeant. On January 23, 1946, 8 months after the battle at Umaray, Sergeant John Randolph McKinney stood in the White House. President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. 3 other servicemen received their medals in the same ceremony. A photograph from the Truman Library shows all 4 recipients standing beside the president in the Oval Office. Truman called it a great citation. McKinney said nothing memorable in return. He was a man of third-grade education from rural Georgia who had never sought attention and did not want it now. When reporters asked him about the medal, he offered a single thought. Everyone in the infantry deserved one. The infantry had it roughest of all. Then John McKinney went home to Screven County, and he disappeared. John McKinney returned to Screven County, Georgia in 1946 and did what he had done before the war. He farmed, he fished, he hunted in the same swamps where he had learned to shoot as a boy. He never married. He lived quietly in the rural countryside between Sylvania and the Savannah River, working the land the same way his sharecropper father had worked it before him. The Medal of Honor sat in his home. He rarely spoke about it. The military establishment invited him to ceremonies, reunions, and commemorative events for years after the war. McKinney declined almost all of them. A local newspaper in Macon, Georgia, ran a profile on him in 1964, nearly 2 decades after the battle. The reporter noted that McKinney shunned parades and ceremonies. He wanted to forget the war. That single line captured the man more accurately than any citation ever could. He had done what needed to be done on the morning of May 11th, and he saw no reason to keep talking about it. McKinney's case was not unique among Medal of Honor recipients. Many of the men who received the decoration in World War II came home and lived ordinary lives. What made McKinney's story unusual was how completely he vanished from public memory. Audie Murphy, the most decorated American soldier of the war, became a movie star. Other recipients wrote memoirs, gave lectures, or served as public symbols of wartime valor. McKinney did none of these things. He was a man with a third-grade education who had no interest in fame and no use for it. The swamps of Georgia were enough. He lived in Screven County for the rest of his life. He died on April 5, 1997, at the age of 76. He was buried at Doubleheads Baptist Church Cemetery in Sylvania, the same small town where a general store owner had once lent a hungry boy a rifle in exchange for squirrels and rabbits. In 2017, the state of Georgia renamed a stretch of highway in his honor. It is now called the John R. McKinney Medal of Honor Highway. Forrest Bryant Johnson published a biography in 2007 titled Phantom Warrior, documenting the full story of McKinney's life and the battle at Dingalan Bay. The book brought McKinney's name back to a generation that had never heard it. The official Medal of Honor citation remains on file with the Congressional Medal of Honor Society. It records that Private McKinney saved his company from possible annihilation and set an example of unsurpassed intrepidity. 40 dead enemy soldiers around a single gun position. One private from Georgia who slept with his rifle beside him because that was what a hunter did. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If it moved you, leave a like. That one click helps this channel bring more forgotten heroes back to life. Subscribe and hit the bell so the next story finds you. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from today. John McKinney never wanted anyone to remember what he did on that morning in the Philippines. He thought every infantryman deserved the same honor. Maybe he was right. But someone has to tell their stories, and someone has to listen.